All right, was everyone able to start? Record? Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Charlie Gabor. I'm a program specialist with the Office of International Affairs, and today I have some guests with me from the Department of State. So I'm going to ask my guests just to introduce themselves. Michelle, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. My name is Michelle Lee. I am a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Department of State. I've been in that role for a little over 17 years, and I'm presently on assignment in Brussels, Belgium, at the U.S. mission to the EU. I'm currently working on refugee and migration affairs, but my specialty in the Foreign Service is public diplomacy. So I've worked in a number of assignments over my career in that field. But right now that's my role and that's where I'm at. And just want to add to my intro that I put on scarlet and gray on purpose for this audience. I am a Columbus native, so really happy to answer the questions that come up today and share my perspective on working in foreign affairs. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jolles. I'm also with the Department of State. I'm also a Foreign Service Officer, and I have also been in just over 17 years too. So Michelle and I both came in under Colin Powell's Diplomatic Readiness Initiative. I am in Washington in the Bureau of Economic Affairs. I have multiple tours, so I'm not based in Washington. I have been here in my current job for 1 year. Right before that, I was detailed to the World Bank. And really excited to be here and to discuss what it means to be a Foreign Service Officer and to have a career in foreign affairs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Piracha, and I am a Foreign Affairs Officer at the Department of State. I'm in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at State, and I've been with the department for 7 years. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us. We just have a couple of questions to ask you today. So let's just start off with a little bit of an introduction to what your current roles are. So can you just tell us a little bit more about your current work at the State Department, please?
I represent the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, otherwise known as PRM. If you get into the State Department, you will learn quickly that we are a land of acronyms. So the Bureau that I represent right now is responsible for the U.S. government's refugee policies, as well as the provider of humanitarian assistance for refugees around the world. So in Brussels, what that means is that I engage with EU counterparts, the European Union counterparts, on how we best deploy that assistance. The US and the European Union are the top two donors globally of humanitarian assistance for refugees. And with the needs rising, that means it's all the more important that we get it right. So that's my role here in Brussels right now. As I said before, my career track in the Foreign Service is public diplomacy. So this is actually a little bit of a step outside the assignments that I normally work in, but I have a real passion for migration and refugee issues, and I was thrilled when I had the opportunity to step into this role. It's been a great experience. I've been here for 2 years, 1 more year to go, and then we'll see where the journey takes me next. So.
Great. So I'm in, as I said, the Economic Bureau, which I'm in specifically the Office of Development Finance. What that means, the bread and butter of our work is to work with multilateral development banks, you probably best know the World Bank, to advance development of projects and to monitor much of what they do and to promote and to ensure that they're working in a manner that helps U.S. national interests. Specifically, though, my work, which is a little bit different in our office, is to work with the G20, the development working group within the G20. So I negotiate at the G20. I also work on quality infrastructure initiatives. Specifically in our office right now, it's something we call the Blue Dot Network, which is a way to brand and certify quality infrastructure abroad. So it's an initiative this administration is pushing forward to make sure that we can really sell both US financed, now this is private sector financed infrastructure projects that meet the standards that the US holds dear. So these are things that ensure that workers' rights are respected, the environment is respected, and that projects have coherent financing that allows for sustainable projects, roads that don't fall apart and can be upheld over the long run.
So as I mentioned, I am at the State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, which engages on a number of justice sector issues. So as the name implies, that includes counter narcotics, but also anti-corruption, strengthening judicial sectors, cybercrime, countering wildlife trafficking. And so our Bureau, being Washington-based, works on a number of different issues. So first is policy development in these issue areas. And then also the Bureau has foreign assistance funding, which we use to develop concrete programs and projects that then take place to move those issues forward. So this is one of the bureaus that is right at the nexus between policy development and then policy implementation, and finding concrete ways to actually turn policy goals into changes on the ground. So I'll pause there for now, and then we'll get into the discussion more.
Oh, yeah. Please. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of different career tracks that one can take in the State Department. Can you tell us a little bit more about those differences and how you get started? For example, like what is the difference between a foreign service and foreign affairs officer?
I'll start the conversation. The foreign service track is quite different from the civil service track. So it is important to note that the majority of employees at the State Department are actually on our civil service side, as well as a number of contractors, and then we have a lot of staff in the field who help us out. We have locally employed staff at all our embassies and consulates overseas who, the civil service and the LE staff are invaluable parts of the State Department. I would say if you're looking at a career at the State Department, look at both the civil service and the foreign service options. The entryway into that career path is quite different. I'll just briefly say that you want to get familiar with USA Jobs and get smart on USA Jobs if you're interested in the civil service lane. For entry into the foreign service, it really is all about the foreign service entrance exams. There are written and oral tests that are required to enter the foreign service. So that's one big difference between the two. I would also say that our civil service colleagues, American civil service colleagues, are usually based mostly in Washington, and I'm sure, Alan, you can add to that perspective. But our foreign service colleagues, myself included, spend the majority of their career overseas. Most foreign service officers spend some time back in Washington, but we move around every, I would say, 2 to 3 years in different assignments in different places. And that's a big difference, I think, between the two lanes. I'll leave it there and ask others to chime in.
I'll defer to Alan because Michelle said the foreign service part really well, and I'll let Alan go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. So as Michelle described, this isn't necessarily a hard rule, but typically foreign service officers spend more of their career overseas, whereas the civil service jobs tend to be Washington based. I think one of the other distinctions that, again, isn't a clear rule, but when you look at the State Department org chart, we have what we call geographical bureaus and functional bureaus. And so the functional bureaus, for example, the one that I'm in, but there's a number of them: democracy, human rights and labor, counterterrorism, educational and cultural affairs that works on various study abroad type programs and exchanges, conflict and stabilization, which works in post-conflict zones, are the types of functional bureaus, and those tend to be primarily civil service. And unlike the foreign service, which has regular rotations, typically 2 or 3 years, in the civil service, you typically find a career path in a specific thematic area, and then spend longer periods of time either within that bureau or even within that specific job. So in the civil service, you have an opportunity to really focus on a very specific thematic issue of interest, and then really dive very deeply into that issue.
And I would say that's really why our civil service colleagues are so invaluable, because they do the deep dive in one area or another. When you are hired as a foreign service officer, you are typically the path is as a generalist. We also have in the foreign service generalists and specialists. I'm a generalist, so although my career track is public diplomacy, the expectation is that you can kind of drop me into different jobs in different places, and I'll do the best job I can. But our civil service colleagues in Washington are really the deep dive regional and thematic specialists, and that's why they are so important to the institution. We become, the foreign service officers, we become smart as quickly as we can on different issues in different places, but our civil service colleagues are so important to the State Department in that regard.
Wow, thank you. So it sounds like there's a lot of different ways to get involved with the State Department. I'm curious to see how your personal careers got started.
Yeah, so I joined the Foreign Service in 2003, but prior to that, I worked in academia. I had my first international experience when I was a junior at Otterbein University, which some of your students will know. I'm a Buckeye, by the way. My family is like super closely tied with Ohio State University. My parents both taught at Ohio State. I was born in Ohio State University Hospital, so I'm through and through a Columbus native. But I was the dark horse in the family and went to Otterbein for my college studies. And in my third year at Otterbein, I begged my parents to let me study abroad in England. And that was kind of what started my path into international experiences, international interests. I did graduate work in Australia. I was in the Peace Corps. I can, expand on any of that as you would like me to later, but I really, once I had traveled overseas, I caught the bug, and I knew that wherever my life took me and my professional journey took me, it would be in international affairs. So I joined the Foreign Service, as I said, in 2003. That journey has taken me to Western Africa, to Europe, to Mexico, Canada, multiple assignments in Washington, D.C., and the journey continues. But I would say that the seed was definitely planted as a junior at Otterbein when I got my first passport to spend 3.5 months in England, which at the time was the most exotic place I could ever imagine going. And it was the first time I lived outside of Columbus, Ohio. So that's how it started, but I'm happy to fill in details on any of that as you want later.
So I came into the Foreign Service as a baby. I came in straight out of undergrad. I did not have a huge breadth of cultural experience, which my sense is that many undergrads now have. My father was a Thai immigrant, so we did go and visit on a pretty regular basis Thailand to see my cousins and to see family. But I'm from Southern Indiana, from a small town in Southern Indiana, Evansville, and had some travel experience. I was able to go with IU when I was in high school to learn French. I did a study abroad program. So I had some cultural experiences, but came in through the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative really just by surprise after passing the test. and hadn't lived in any big cities. Washington, D.C. was a very big city for me. And then my first tour was in Bogota, Colombia, and that was a huge adventure. I highlight a lot of this because I think it's important to recognize that while now we have lots of really cool, interesting cultural experiences and we speak multiple foreign languages, but we didn't all come in with this huge breadth. We're average Americans that know the US very well, but often, don't know the country we're going to.
I'll start by saying that I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan, so hopefully that doesn't offend your students too much. But I went to Bowling Green State University for undergrad, so maybe that wins some points. So I also, during my junior year, did a semester abroad in Aberystwyth, Wales, so perhaps not too far from where Michelle was. I had started undergrad as a film production major, actually, and was quite interested in visual arts and film. But during that semester abroad, I also became very interested in learning more about the world, about international politics and diplomacy. And so when I returned to Bowling Green, I ended up double majoring in both film and political science. I then went on to grad school in public diplomacy, which was sort of a blend between those two. And while I was in grad school at American University, which is in DC, I got into a program called the Pathways Program that allows grad students to work full-time at state while in grad school. And that program is actually federal government wide, so there's many agencies that participate. And so during that program, I had the opportunity to do a number of rotations in a variety of State Department bureaus. And when the program ended, I was able to convert full-time and have been with state ever since.
Well, it sounds like education abroad and international experiences seem like a really good stepping stone for most of you. So it's really good to hear that. So on a more personal note, I'm kind of curious now that we're starting learning a bit more about your roles, what has been the most interesting cultural experience that you've had so far in your career?
Yeah, when I saw that question, I was like, oh, I don't know how, I don't know how to like narrow it down to one. And I sometimes get asked the question, like, what was your favorite posting or what's your favorite experience overseas? And I can't narrow it down to one. I will say that there are moments in my trajectory where just certain things stand out. I mean, again, when I went to London as a study abroad student, it was my first time with a passport. It was my first time living outside Columbus. It was the first time taking public transport. It was my first time, taking trips by myself or, just traveling around independently. And that is so memorable. I mean, it may not seem like super cross-cultural because it's England and they speak the same language as us, but for me personally, that was such a life-changing experience that I will never forget that moment. I mean, and there's so many other moments I could talk about. I mean, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Romania, that was the first time that I lived anywhere that was like not like where I grew up. And so there were lots of moments in that experience that really opened my eyes to the fact that the world is really diverse. And I started to appreciate that difference much more. Same with my first assignment in the Foreign Service was in Ghana, which was my first time in Africa. So all of these cultural experiences everywhere I've gone, there's no way to say like one is my favorite. There's just moments in each of those experiences that will always stay with me and that have really shaped the path that I've been on.
I agree. It's a very hard question. I think to some extent, some of your first experiences, as Michelle really pointed out, are some of the most exciting. And sometimes that's just riding a bus when you're not used to riding public transport, maybe ever anywhere in your life. For me, I'll tell one really quick story. My first tour was Bogota, which I loved. It was just a fabulous place to serve. And I remember one of my contacts pretty quickly said, so, you guys seem to live in bubbles. What cultural experiences have you had? And, we threw out some things like, oh, we went to this really neat restaurant and had a great time. And he's like, that's not a cultural experience, right? And so then throughout my tour, I kept thinking, well, what are real cultural experiences here? And I was so glad to go back and report to it at one point, because so vallenato is a type of traditional music in Colombia. It's a really fun. Carlos Vives is one of the best known vallenato singers, really great music, lots of fun. And the Colombians love to dance and they love happy music. Anyway, at one point, the son of a woman I worked with was in a vallenato band. And so I got a group of friends together. I said, oh yeah, let's go hear this vallenato band. So we go to this club, we listen to it. And I go home because I have work the next day and I go and sleep like any normal person does. And the vallenato band comes over to my house after they're done playing, after they've gotten themselves, we stay till the end, which maybe is midnight or something, but they get themselves cleaned up afterwards. I go home to go to bed, and sure enough, there's a knock on my door, and the vallenato player, the accordion player, and the band are there deciding they need a cool place to hang out, and they're going to use my apartment. And so we stay up all night with them just singing vallenato and playing the accordion. It was a blast. And it's one of the few times in my life I've actually stayed up all night, and I got dressed and went to work the next morning and issued visas after that, which was really a challenge.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I also thought this was a challenging question to answer, because where do you even start? And so as I was thinking through it, so I was thinking, when we travel, and especially being in a DC-based role, I tend to have a number of trips per year, but on a short time frame. So I don't have 2 years at post. I have a week, maybe 2 weeks if it's a long trip. And so one of the things that I've really liked to do, as Julie was describing, and try and get out of the bubble, of the embassy or the hotel where you're staying, is to ask one of the local staff, where do you like to go with your friends? What restaurant do you like to go to with your family? And find somewhere that is sort of outside of that typical either tourist or expat type bubble, and have a meal, try the national dish, try the national drink. And so that's something that I always really try to do on every trip, no matter how short it might be, to really try and get some sort of experience beyond the confines of the embassy.
Wow, I apologize. I didn't mean to throw you all a curveball with that question, but I know it's really challenging to just pick one special experience, and I think those were all wonderful insights into your lives. So I appreciate that very much. And I know normally we wouldn't be able to have this conversation in person since we're all kind of in different locations. But I think COVID-19 has presented some new challenges for all of us. I'm curious to know how has COVID-19 actually affected your jobs in international diplomacy as we know it?
Yeah, so just speaking from where I'm at here in Brussels, certainly the pandemic has had a major impact on my typical work. I normally in this position travel quite a bit, and that's not happening. I normally am going into the office every day and am normally meeting contacts out over lunches or coffees, and that's not happening. I'm this, like what you see behind me is my environment most days of the week. So it is impacting the face-to-face diplomacy, which I think once we reach I hope post-COVID environment, I do believe that face-to-face diplomacy, it's still important. We still need it. It's not happening the way it needs to be right now, at least at all levels, but it will come back. But right now we're limited in what we can do in a face-to-face or face mask to face mask format. And so, yeah, I'm working mostly virtually, mostly from home. And that's just a huge difference from what I would normally be doing in this position. When I say the face-to-face contact though, you know, it is about the interpersonal connection that you make, and diplomacy is, if nothing else, about connecting with your counterparts and being able to talk about sometimes sensitive issues. And that's just, there's no equivalent for that engagement on a face-to-face basis through, as we all know, I mean, through Zoom or through, you know, whatever. That said, that has been a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think, I won't speak for Julie and Alan, but I think we will probably all agree on the fact that the situation has really opened up some tools and technologies that the State Department was not making good use of before. And I think that some of that is really going to stick. I think that we're seeing some benefits of what we can do, even without the face-to-face, even without the travel. I think there's a lot of opportunities that the situation has opened up for diplomats and those of us working in foreign affairs.
I think that's a really excellent summary. I would, to generalize, I'd say that formal engagement. So I should have been at the G20 in Saudi Arabia 2 additional times this year to negotiate documents. We still have had those meetings, but they can't be as long, right? Because how do you pack 8 hours into a call when you have people from Japan and Saudi Arabia and the United States and Canada and France, and you go on, right, with 20 countries around the world. So you will have 2-hour calls, maybe 3-hour calls. So you just can't, because of the time difference, have as long. The functional part of it, negotiating a text, we don't like this line, we want this taken out, is still, we're still able to do, and we're able to do in a pretty effective way. But the most important thing we do, and the way we advance our agenda, as Michelle said, is through the person-to-person contact. And there's a real, it's the informality about that that's sometimes really important, right? Let's go get a drink. Hey, I know you're really frustrated with the US position on this. I'll tell you what I think we could do. Let's go get a drink and discuss this, right? And sometimes that's really kind of bringing your shield down and allowing for additional information that maybe you're not fully within the talking points. And sometimes it's just making them believe that you're not giving them a talking point when you really are giving them a talking point, right? But you don't have that on a screen, and you certainly don't have those in broad negotiations either.
Yeah, I would agree with exactly what Julie just said. Our office works on a number of different multilateral fronts. So for instance, there's an annual UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is Vienna-based. So we work closely with the mission in Vienna. We also work on a number of issues through the Organization of American States. And what we've been seeing is that the formal meetings are still taking place on Zoom, but the informal discussions, exactly as both Michelle and Julie were describing, is really what has been challenging to try and do. So just in my own experience, while you make progress in sort of the formal plenary or at least in the Commission on Narcotic Drugs context, what's called the Committee of the Whole, where resolution text might be negotiated, a lot of the informal agreements happen during the coffee break or on the sidelines in the hall. And that's been really challenging to try and replicate from a Zoom or other virtual type platform. But to Michelle's point about the opportunities that have come from this, on the programming side of the INL House, a lot of the bread and butter of what we do is supporting various training or technical assistance type of events. And with the transition to online formats, we have been able to dramatically expand the number of foreign contacts and counterparts that we can engage with. So I think even as we move out of sort of a more restricted COVID environment, we will be seeing a hybrid moving forward, where I think there will be a lot of activity that remains online, but there are going to be some elements that will definitely benefit from being in person again.
I just want to add to that a big impact, because I'm a public diplomacy officer, I have to comment that the impact on the State Department's exchange programs under the pandemic is huge. We have a number of signature exchange programs like the International Visitor Leadership Program, the Fulbright Program, well over 100 different youth, student, professional, academic exchanges that, you know, both Americans going abroad and foreign students and professionals coming to the US, those can't happen right now. And it's a huge blow to the soft power of the State Department, which, you know, that's normally the lane that I've been working in. That has been a huge impact, and there's no replacing it. When we get past this awful period, those will resume, but right now there's just no substitute, and that's a blow to a lot of us.
Well, I think we join you in sharing the troubles and challenges that come with these restrictions on international travel, in particular in face-to-face contact, especially when it comes to, you know, education abroad, which is so central to what we do in the Office of International Affairs. Fulbright is something many of our students take advantage of. I know we all look forward to the day when that can come back and we can start breaking down those barriers and starting rebuilding those relationships again. Kind of going a little bit backwards, I know some of you have touched on this before, but I'm curious to know a little bit more about your education abroad experiences. It's a bit of a mercenary question coming from, since that's sort of where I work, but I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about those experiences and how they sort of helped prepare you for your current roles.
Yeah, so as I said before, my first time abroad with a passport overseas was as a junior at Otterbein in England. And, you know, I had to beg my parents to let me go. I'm the youngest of 3 daughters. We did not grow up in an international family. The most international thing about my life was that my dad was Canadian. So we would go up north of the border and visit them. But so that first experience of going abroad was fundamentally a huge life-changing experience, and I will always be grateful to my parents for letting me go. I got the travel bug. I also knew that I wanted to pursue a master's degree, so I actually applied for master's degree programs in both the US, England, and Australia. I ended up getting an offer with a scholarship to the University of Melbourne in Australia and did a full degree there, which also is just, you know, a huge, you know, space in my life that I am so grateful for, not only for the academic piece of it, but just the people I met, the connections I made, the experience I had, and even a different educational system, really eye-opening. I actually focused my master's degree thesis on Australian politics and eventually built on that when I did a PhD. So the PhD I actually did back in the US, but I focused on international issues based on my time in Australia. So I can't even think about where I'm at today and the trajectory I've taken without those first 2 study abroad experiences. Even though they were in like easy places like London and Melbourne, they fundamentally changed my life. I always say to people, if you are thinking about study abroad, do it. if you haven't thought about it at all, like, I mean, when I was in high school in Columbus, I had no idea. I didn't even think about study abroad. I thought I was just going to be in Columbus for the rest of my life. So especially the people who aren't yet there, but I think most of your students are already there. So yeah, like go forth and travel and in every way that you can.
So there were two really formative travel experiences. The first one being in high school when I went it was a full immersion program to Brest in France. I didn't speak French very well, but I was with a host family and there was a rule that we weren't allowed for the 3 months that we were there to speak any English. So my French improved. And I would stress that early language learning is important. You're not going to get a language as well once you're older. I learned Spanish when I was 25-ish, and I learned French when I was 16. And the difference still in my ability and my fluency is dramatic. So first of all, I'd say for language learning, it's very important. But secondly, and this goes to my other experience, was in 1997, in mid-1997, we went to Thailand for our summer vacation, as we often did, to see family, and things were very different because, so this is the summer really before I go to college. All of a sudden there'd been this building, huge amount of building that we'd never seen, huge amounts of development. And I remember every one of my father's friends said, "Oh, you should stay at our beach house. Here's our key. And this was strange, right? Like, how does everybody have a beach house in these little sleepy beach towns?" And I remember very, very vividly going to one of the friends' beach houses. There are two huge towers in this little town called Hoi Hin, middle of nowhere on the beach, huge pool in the middle, and there's nobody there. We're there, we don't see anyone. The whole weekend we stay there. I remember a guy like cleaning the pool between the two towers. No one else is ever in the pool. Nothing happens. And my family and I keep going, well, this is really weird. How does everyone have a beach house now? And how in the world do they have the money? Like, this is really strange, these sleepy towns. And within a couple months, the Asian economic crash happened. This is why I became an economic officer. It's why I studied economics in college. And it was so shocking and so dramatic. And we saw, really just as tourists, like something weird's going on here. And once it happened, after it happened and I saw my cousins suffering and everyone suffering, I took my first Econ 101 course and it blew my mind. And I said, I want to study economics. Like this will help the world. This is what countries need to know about. Now, I was a little naive because Econ 101 doesn't save the world, but I do believe economic development and thoughtful economics does help save lives and improve lives. So that's like the reason I became not just a foreign service officer, but an economic officer. It really was one trip, one specific trip in which I saw an economy close to collapse.
I mentioned earlier the semester that I spent in Aberystwyth with, which resulted in me changing, or I should say adding a major and really changing the trajectory of my career and my interests. While I was in grad school, I also did a shorter semester abroad, or not a semester, but a summer course, about 4 weeks in Israel. And that also is a type of experience that just cannot be replicated when you're reading a book or studying from a classroom. Being able to actually be out on the ground, see the topography in person, to be able to see, at least in the context of Israel, layers of history built on top of each other, really just gives you an understanding that just cannot be replicated in any other way. So I would very much be an advocate for study abroad of any type. And I would echo what Julie said about trying to learn languages early. If I do have any regret from my study abroad experience, it's that I did not choose a location where I could have learned another language. So I would definitely advocate for that as well.
Thank you. It sounds like these international experiences have really been very pivotal to not only your careers, but your entire lives. So I know that's a really personal experience, and I'm glad that you all still feel it's important, and hope that our students get that experience as well. Getting more to the career side of things, what advice would you give for somebody who's hoping to start a career at the Department of State?
One thing I would suggest, if they haven't already, your students check out is the careers.state.gov website. I had no idea that these kinds of internships and fellowships and the Pathways program, which I'm sure may not have existed when I was a student, but there's a whole host of opportunities for even high school students and university students and graduate students to explore that I wish I had known back when I was an undergraduate or graduate student. I didn't even learn about the Foreign Service until I was a graduate student, to be fair. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunities that the State Department offers to people who are, pre-career and looking at foreign affairs as an opportunity. And I just really endorse the careers.state.gov website as a great resource for finding out more about those.
I would just say, don't underestimate yourself. Don't underestimate your skills. So whether that's, I need a hard language, I don't have a hard language, or I'm not the right race, or I'm not the right gender, or I'm not the right whatever. We want and need a diverse workforce, and that means diversity as you would normally define it in terms of race and gender, but more importantly, it also means diversity of experiences. So maybe you are an academic, maybe you're not. Maybe you're a person who's really, really good at math, and maybe you're a person that's terrible at math. We need a diverse group of people, and hopefully one that fully represents the United States of America. So I urge everyone to look into it. And I would also say, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me, I'm always willing to be available and happy to talk about what state looks like and what we want it to be.
I'm just going to jump in here before you speak, Alan, and say, I'm so pleased that all three of us are from the Midwest. That's super exciting to me, because I joined the Foreign Service and suddenly met all these East Coast, it was so intimidating when I first joined, but I'm so happy that all three of us are from the heartland.
In addition to some of the resources that Michelle mentioned, careers.state.gov, and earlier in the conversation, usajobs.gov, I would also just highlight that there are a number of student programs. So Pathways, which is the avenue I use to join the State Department. There's also the Presidential Management Fellowship, the PMF, which is for grad students. There's also a virtual student foreign service, which existed pre-COVID and allows interested students to work with the State Department on a specific project, no matter where you're located. And so there's a lot of different ways to be involved, a lot of different resources, and just see the website, and there's a lot there to learn about.
There really are a wealth of resources available to students, so thank you for sharing those. Any tips for the FSO exam or interview processes for these highly sought after jobs that you all possess?
So I guess Julie and I joined around the same time. So maybe Julie will share my feeling that back in the day, there were not the resources there are now for preparing for the Foreign Service Officer exam, meaning online, chat groups and in-person, groups. I didn't even know that there was a School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, where you have a very focused effort on helping people enter into the Foreign Service. I was kind of out on my own. I took some recommendations from some Foreign Service officers at the time, which was just to, get smart on the areas of the Foreign Service tests that I was not going to be as strong in. So my background is in communications, psychology, sociology. When I took the Foreign Service officer test, I was doing my PhD in public and international affairs, but I didn't have a deep bench in my brain for international affairs. So I knew that I needed to get a lot smarter in certain areas. The Foreign Service officer test is and always has been about hiring generalists. So they really do want a broad range of experiences. There were questions on the test that spoke directly to my undergraduate and graduate degrees, but there were also a lot of areas that I needed to get smarter on. And so I spent a lot of my time preparing and focusing on those areas. So I think just there's a lot of there's books and online forums and things like that for people who want to take the test. But I think focus on the areas that you might be weaker in. And know that if you've had a good, solid university education, that's going to serve you well in taking the test. I also say to anyone who's thinking about taking the test, just do it. When I took it, I had no idea if I was going to pass or not. It was all right, we'll just see how this goes. And if I don't pass, maybe I'll take it again, maybe I won't. But if you're thinking about it, take it. See what it's like. Maybe you pass, maybe you don't. It's not going to hurt you at all to take it and go through the experience. And then I will also say it's always a good plan B, because I was already working as a full-time academic when I took the test. So while my security clearances and other things went through, which takes some time, it took me a year and a half. It was like I took the test in September 2001 and I started September 2003. So it took almost 2 years for all of my security and other clearances to go through, and I passed on the first go. So for the test, I say just go for it, and do the prep, research what options are, what resources are out there for you, but don't feel like it's a one and done kind of thing. That's my advice.
I'm going to break the rules here. I think I'm not supposed to get up and walk to my bookshelf to answer this question. So I, as things fall, I did only one thing, except for reading Economist, which I still believe you should read the Economist, the New York Times. Back in the day, Michelle's right. Back in the day, I did one thing, which is I got this book. This is the copy of it. You'll see it's all rat-eared and it still has my notes in it. And I actually now have it. It's been signed by Henry Kissinger actually now, but that's after years of carrying it around in the hope I could get a Henry Kissinger signature. I love this book. Now, look, for the Foreign Service exam, do you need to know the entire history of diplomacy and do you need Henry Kissinger to help you with that? No. But I will say that I think it for a person going in who I did well on the economic part, I was going to do well on the economic part, and I think many people didn't do well on that, so that probably boosted my score a lot. But on a lot of the political science part and American history part, I wasn't going to do as well. This helped me to do that. It also, it made me excited about, it's a really good book. And I say this as not a person who really thought I would want to read Henry Kissinger's Diplomacy. It is a really good book. And I think it is actually something that you're like, you know what, I'm going to take, take the test as many times as you want. Completely agree with it. That's the best advice. But then I would also say second best advice, read New York Times, Economist, the things you normally read, keep up with politics. But I also would say if you want a good book to read, I'd suggest that.
Yeah, and then I just want to echo that advice. whether you're applying for any of the fellowships or student programs, the FSOT, read, prepare, practice, study, but go for it, just go for it. And if it doesn't work out the first time, you can do it again. So I think that's really just one of the most important takeaways is just do it.
Thank you so much for that. I'm curious. So we've kind of talked about preparing for the exam and sort of a bit about what you do in your specific careers. And we've touched on how important language can be in all of your roles and in working in a foreign environment. But are there other skills or trainings that you would recommend that people sort of work on if they're thinking about entering into one of these careers? Or are there things you wish you would have learned before you started your career that people can start developing now?
As far as specific training goes, I don't have much to say about that because actually the State Department does a really good job of training internally. We have our own Foreign Service Institute that has both language training programs as well as functional job-related training. So coming into the job, I felt very well supported by the Foreign Service Institute in terms of like kind of getting me ready to go out and do my first tour. And then later, you know, when I needed to go out to places that required language training, my second tour was in Berlin, Germany. Later, I served in Monterrey, Mexico, and the State Department gave me, you know, 6 to 8 months of language training for both of those posts, which is such an amazing benefit of the Foreign Service is that you can actually get paid to learn a language. So there are a lot of things that you don't need to have coming into the Foreign Service. Skills, I mean, I just think honing whatever you can in terms of personal flexibility and open-mindedness. There's no way to train that, but when I read that question, that was what first came to my mind. The skill that has best served me in this career is being flexible and being open-minded and being willing to go outside my comfort zone. I don't know how you train that. I think you just need to keep finding experiences that touch in those areas, because that is, I mean, certainly for the Foreign Service side of the State Department, those are very core skills that you need to have no matter what.
So Michelle said it better than I would have. And I would say it's completely correct, right? Personal flexibility, experiences that take you out of your comfort zone and you learn how to deal with. I think we probably all have those experiences throughout our life. You have them even in the State Department. The only story I'll give, because I give a lot of stories, is that when I went to New York alone for the first time ever when I was 32. I'd never been in New York, right? I'm still, despite having lived all over the world by this point, I still am nervous about New York, but I have to go, and I have to go by myself because I need to interview for a job at USUN, which I later got and did. But I remember like getting off the plane and being like, I don't know if I can get around New York. Oh my God, we'll see how, I don't even know if I can get to the city. And sure enough, I spent the day wandering New York, just figuring things out. So even now, even after we've lived abroad and we've done these things, we in our own country will frequently encounter situations where you go, okay, got to figure out how to use the map, got to figure out how to do this. How am I going to relay this message to this person who doesn't speak English, or to, you know, how do I get this point across when I speak this language, but I don't speak it very well? That type of flexibility is what we have and what we develop throughout our careers, but you can also develop it in your daily life in things that, in getting out of your comfort zone, anywhere you are in the world, anywhere you are in the United States, and in many, many situations you encounter.
One other skill that I think is critical at State, no matter what job you're in, no matter where you're located, are writing skills. So the ability to present complex information concisely, clearly, and quickly. So if there's any skill set that you can work on ahead of a career at state, just practice writing, and after you have written something, write it again with half the words, and do that until it is as concise as it possibly can be.
You know, I thought I was a good writer when I came into the Foreign Service. I was actually working on my, I was working on my doctoral dissertation when I came into the Foreign Service. So I was like, oh yeah, I've got this like whole writing thing down. And then the first time I wrote a cable, which is a formal, you know, State Department record, you know, report, it came back bleeding red. I was like, oh, I need to learn how to write differently. So totally second that, Ellen.
Yeah, and I'll share that during my second year of grad school, I was living these two contradictions where during the day I was writing in the State Department style of the shortest possible sentence. And then on the weekends, I'd have to churn out 15, 20-page papers. And it's just, how can I make this longer? I just have to add 3 more pages. And then finish that paper on Sunday, and Monday morning it's back in the state. So really practice those skills, especially if you're coming from academia.
Well, never, you know, I feel like writing is a skill one can always develop, and there's so many other things that are really important to this job. So I appreciate all of the insight you've given us today. So just as a final kind of like wrap up, if you've convinced me I'm ready to change careers, I know there's a lot of people who are ready to sign up right now. What are my next steps? Where do I go if I want to jump in and start my career today? What do I need to do now?
Well, I mean, I think just underscore that whole kind of seek out the experiences. Open as many doors as you can, whether it's an internship or a fellowship or a job application or taking the Foreign Service Officer exam. I tell people a lot of the time, just like throw open as many doors as you can. The best problem that you will ever have is if like 2 of those or more actually deliver something that you have to choose from, you know, whether it's, you know, if you're looking at another educational experience, or if a job offer comes along, or if the opportunity to travel abroad is there. The best possible problem is that you've thrown open so many doors that you have more than one option ahead of you. I think focusing too narrowly on one possible path is not a good strategy. I think you just look at the wide range of things that appeal to you, and go for all of them. And then you get to kind of like hone what makes the most sense as things come through.
I just say, don't be afraid of jobs that, don't be afraid of any job, in that even jobs that you don't think that are going to get you to your end goal, what you need to know is how you work and how you like to work. So prior to State Department, I was at Deutsche Bank for a very short period of time, a job which I hated. And in the evenings, I didn't have a professional wardrobe. So in the evenings, I worked at a women's clothing store to essentially fund the purchase of a professional wardrobe. And I found I enjoyed working at the women's clothing store much more than I did at Deutsche Bank, because it was fast paced. I was on my feet. Things were always changing. I was busy. I had things I could focus on, and that would be folding sweaters. But I learned so much in that job, and just learning who I was and what I like to do. I learned so much more than I did at Deutsche Bank. And so I would urge you to seek out lots of opportunities, and even the ones where you say, well, I don't know if it's really going to get me to end goal. It doesn't matter. It's going to help you understand who you are and what you want to be. And that's more important than anything.
Yeah, I think my final comment is along similar lines, in that there is no single path. And so take an all of the above approach, open as many doors as you can, as Michelle said. Also keep in mind, there are other federal agencies, there are other programs, there's the Peace Corps, which has been mentioned. There's a number of contracting jobs. There are implementing partners that the Department of State works with that will implement a number of the programs that we are supporting. So there's a wide field out there, a wide range of opportunities, and don't be afraid to seek them all out.
All right, well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. It really has been such a wonderful conversation that I've gotten to have with all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Michelle, I think it's obligatory that I give you an OH.
Oh, IO.
And, you know, it's all of our Midwest representation. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. We will
Guy from Ann
absolutely.
Arbor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I said, even that guy from Ann Arbor.
Yeah, we won't hold that against him. It just goes to show that people can, State Department folks can come from anywhere. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful time talking with you all.